Salam.
Somebody started. Oh.
Okay. So India sir,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Our learned expert, Dr. Santhi Natrajan, dear colleague, faculty, colleagues, and friends, a very good evening to all. In fact, we were planning to conduct a lecture series on the assessment, mentoring, etc. For the last 2 months. Due to many preoccupations, we didn't get time to start it. In fact, this assessment, mentoring, or teaching learning process itself, in digital era, it is all getting redefined day by day. Nothing that we do for our students is more important than assessment. Assessment lies at the heart of learning experience. And in fact, it shapes the understanding of curriculum, and it decides the ability to make their future. In assessment, we have summative and formative assessment methods. Summative assessment is assessment of the learner, and the formative is assessment for the learner. So there is only one preposition difference. One is of and the other is for, making a whole lot of difference. Our traditional system mostly summative means, and is it becoming obsolete? It's a question. How our university systems, the extent of this assessment, how it is being addressed by our university system, and are we giving enough space for formative assessment methods? And the questions posed by new generation students, can it be answered by our ancient methods or good old methods, or we say in single, I mean, then in what you call in course, we must say, is it going to be a good old method? Is it the ancient methods? Will it address the new questions posed by our students? So, നമ്മുടെ പഴയ ഉത്തരങ്ങൾ പുതിയ ചോദ്യത്തിന് മതിയാവാതെ വരുന്നു. എപ്പോഴും ഞാൻ പറയുന്ന ഒരു കാര്യം, നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. Then coming back to mentoring, assessment basis, coming back to mentoring, we have got an advisory system in place for the last many years. Santhi Natrajan is one among us. She belongs to our alumni. She is our alumnus. And we have got an advisory system. How many of us like to be advised? So the term advice, do we like it? So how many of us like to be advised? The teachers are supposed to be good mentors. And the question that how many of us are good mentors is another question. And in order to be a good mentor, we must be good listeners. അപ്പോഴും ഒരു ചോദ്യം ഉള്ളത്, നമ്മൾ എത്ര നേരം കുട്ടികളെ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്? How good, how I must assess myself, how good am I a listener? So that is, so it is a big problem. So I must be so far as documentation is concerned, I must be good in documenting each and every flaws of my student. He didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't submit this on this date, and so on and so forth. And I give him a chance to make him sit in front of me and pointed out my one of his flaws in gentle terms. Have I been able to do that? Did I get time for that? Did I get time for that? That's another question. So, did I ever praise or applauded his achievements? Small though, must be a small in our view, but did I ever get time to praise him, applaud him on his achievements? So that's the kind of mentoring, and where do we stand in mentoring is a big question. Many of our students are on the verge of a breakdown. We are experiencing it. So during this pandemic, two of our students, they left us on a bad background. So we know that. So it happens more often. So they are on the verge of a breakdown, and we must identify it. And we must make some efforts to reconcile their minds. So in this context, a talk by Dr. Santhi Natrajan, the first in its series, it has tremendous significance. No doubt it has got tremendous significance. This is not the first time she is addressing us. I'm sorry, in 2021 April or so, she addresses the importance of research and innovation in academics. Some of us must be remembering. So she belongs to us, and she is connected to us in many ways. She is our alumnus, having plenty of experience and expertise, and excellent, or rather glittering educational background from Indian Institute of Science and many reputed universities, and working experience in India and Japan. And she is an academic, she was in industry, and she is a versatile person. So we are happy. I'm very happy to welcome again Dr. Shanti to this meeting, to this gathering. I'm sure she'll be delivering it. And I request all my colleagues to be good listeners, and we all must make it together, because it's a collective effort, going to be a collective effort. I have absolutely no doubt about the capacity of our campus to deliver, and our capacity to be adaptable. So we have proved it many a time. So we will again prove it. So I welcome Dr. Santhi Natrajan and all my learned colleagues to this talk. I invite Dr. Santhi Natrajan to deliver her. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you for having me back again in TKMC. Anytime, any day, it's a pleasure to be back in TKM. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I don't know whether I deserve it of all, but yeah, I mean, anyway, lot of respects to my teachers and a lot of love to my colleagues here. Before I start the talk, am I audible, sir? Am I audible?
Yes, doctor. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. So even before I start my talk, my father, Professor K. Natrajan, who is again part of the TKM family in so many ways, he just gave me one piece of advice before even I went to this talk, before even I could even start this talk. He said, a lot of your teachers are there. Stay humble. Okay. So a lot of respects to again to all those teachers who have taught me once upon a time in TKM, and please bear with me if I go overboard with my presentation, because I might be talking about teaching and learning methodologies, assessment methodologies. And in that process, we might as well look into a couple of, new thoughts, maybe a couple of redefinitions to the whole process. Maybe that is what the whole education system needs to have as a change to begin with. So with that intro, I will just start sharing my screen. Please let me know if the screen is okay.
Yes, it is visible.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, you
Okay.
can make it slideshow. Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Now is it visible? Yeah. So the title of the talk, so it's titled as Assessment and Mentoring in Digital Era. So more than digital era, I would like to have a focus on the whole assessment and the mentoring process itself. It just doesn't matter whether which era we are in. In every era, a student is a student, a teacher is a teacher, and it's a beautiful synergy. It's a beautiful relationship that we carry. And even as we are teachers to our students, we are students to our own teachers. And hence we always remain as a student till the time we breathe our last. So again, paying a lot of respect to my teachers, I begin this talk. So this talk is structured around 5 main aspects. And let's quickly look at what an assessment is. We all know what an assessment is, but I'm not here to tell my folks as to what actually assessment, the textbook definition of assessment. I don't have to be here. So let's have a different perspective of what assessment is. Okay. Why do we perform these assessments? What is the end goal? Is it to provide the student a rank, or provide the student a feedback of his learning process, or maybe just confine ourselves to a set of number systems where we say we want to get accredited, we want to go for the next level of our educational institution, the next level in our university, or maybe beyond that, or is it driven by some guidelines like, say, NBA, Washington Accord, or AICTE? Do we do assessments for regulatory bodies, or we do assessments for some other larger than life purpose? Okay, so let's have a look at that. And then once we have an idea of why we perform assessments from a very different perspective, keeping that perspective in mind, we will look at what are the different types of assessments that we can have so that we can effectively evaluate. Are we going to evaluate the student? No. While we evaluate our student, we evaluate ourselves. Where are we in the whole process? Because always assessment has been a one-sided process where the student writes an exam, or maybe attends a quiz, or maybe submits an assignment, and we are going to evaluate. And we are always on that side of the table where we can't be questioned, correct, as teachers. No, let us allow ourselves to be questioned. We deserve to be questioned. We need not be always right. And there is a lot of scope of improvement for ourselves. So it's kind of a retrospective notion where rather than just the student alone getting assessed, we as a collective entity who are part of, or rather the stakeholders, we let us collectively get assessed. And hence we look at what are who are the stakeholders of assessment. And the whole process of assessment is strongly based on, or rather cemented with, a very important property called faith. What is this faith? Where does this originate? Where does this culminate? And where does it stand as a singular entity which drives the whole process of education, right? When I walk into a class as a teacher, I see 50 or 60 students who are sitting there, who will be with me in that journey for the next 40 minutes or say 30 minutes of attention span. Am I able to have an effective dialogue with my student so that I make him or her effective enough in delivering an assessment process to its fullest commitment or extent, or productivity? So let us look at those kind of aspects. And once we have an understanding of all these aspects, then we say, can we make assessment a more enjoyable process? Okay, we give cutoff marks, we say pass percentage, we say, we are preparing our students for competitive exams. We say we have so many colleges and the university, and hence because of the student, when the student performs, it's actually the college that performs, right? The college student bags ranks, college gets its ranking. The student gets placed, college says my alumni. When the student becomes an alumni and goes forward in his life, we take a lot of pride. The institution takes a lot of pride. Okay, so I mean, it's a process. It's a never ending process. At every point you are judged, you are evaluated, and you are given a mark and say, okay, last time when that person came, he did like this time he's. So there is always some sort of comparison, and that frame of reference at which you start comparing things, it is that thing that has to change. So let's have a quick look at these aspects. Now let me try connecting these dots in the next maybe 20 to 30 minutes. Let's look at what is assessment. The basic definition, textbook definition of assessment is to evaluate how much knowledge a student has gathered after a few hours of content delivery in the form of knowledge transition has happened. So this is the textbook definition. So, but then beyond this definition, is there something else? Can we keep aside the notion of having a question paper and an answer sheet and an evaluation and the metrics and then the knowledge levels and then the COPO mapping? Let's please put all those things aside. Let's forget NBA, let's forget AICTE, let's forget all those regulatory bodies, and let's start looking at what can be assessment. Okay. So to say that, we need to understand, or rather redefine, the whole process of knowledge. So knowledge is something that can't be delivered. Knowledge is something that a student has to seek. Unless a student seeks a knowledge, he's not going to get what he or she wants, right? So it may be the same subject, it may be the same concept, it may be the same slide. So for example, I'm presenting this slide here. If I don't explain anything, each one of us is going to perceive it in a very different way. It's because how we have associated to those terms that are going to appear on the screen in the next few moments, and then we start relating based on our own experiences. And based on our own existing knowledge base, we try to always evaluate things, correct? So when we say we are always going to be judgmental and evaluative based on a certain knowledge base, if that knowledge base is not right, our evaluations will go wrong. And hence, with this intro, let's see what can education or knowledge seeking looks like. When the student seeks the right type of knowledge, the teacher by default gives him or her the right type of knowledge. When the student demands, demand always leads to supply. If the student doesn't ask questions, if the student is not seeking, I'm not going to deliver, right? So let's see how that process, if at all a student seeks, if at all I deliver, then let's look how knowledge flows. Perception, correct? I speak about a certain topic in the class, and there is a certain amount of perception. Say I'm going to talk about, let's say, computer science, let's say computer architecture, or let's say compiler design. Each one of us who is from a computer science background or a related background like electrical, electronics, or any one of you who have at least used a computer for once in your life will have an idea, certain amount of idea of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about computer architecture. To some of you, it may be an in-depth knowledge of computer architecture. That is one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is going to be, okay, I have a laptop. I know how to work on Word. I know how to do a PPT. I know how to get onto Zoom. I know how to attend a lecture or rather deliver a lecture. So that is my perception, right? Now, based on my perception, I'm going to judge that particular moment of content delivery or exchange of idea between a seeker and a giver, a student and a teacher. So once you judge something, you are trying to reason it. How will you reason? You have to logically reason it. Can you logically reason all the time? If I have nothing as a predefined experience in my head, can I even reason it? No, probably that is the first experience that I'm going to face. So I will load it. I will save it as somewhere in my mind or my cognitive area as some kind of an experience. I'm going to store it. Now, once I have stored something, I'm learning. I'm learning what? Maybe a new concept, or maybe an augmented idea in the new concept, or maybe something that is relative where I'm trying to apply things from my previous knowledge, right? It's like when I know how to drive a scooter, I at least have a confidence to drive a car because I know that I have the road sense. I know my road on which I'm going to drive. That doesn't change. All that it changes is I have 2 wheels and later I'll have 4 wheels. So there is a basic learning and there is a cumulative learning. There is an experience-based learning. Okay. Now, once I have learned something from the day of my first day of my driving, and 2 months after I have secured my license and I have started driving comfortably on the road, I keep evaluating myself. A teacher need not evaluate a student. A student is going to evaluate every day. Am I better? Am I better? Because I do have a peer pressure. I am not a single student. I am in a collective environment where I have multiple people around me. So one question from the teacher and I'm not able to answer it, I have a peer pressure. I'm being judged, right? But will the teacher feel judged at any point? Teacher is not going to feel judged. All the teacher needs to know is to ask a question. I'm not going to tell that the teacher doesn't know the answer, but a good question, if it can evoke a good answer, and if that good answer can make the teacher think, oh, I did not think from this point of view, that is learning, that is education. Right? So this evaluation process happens every day, every moment, every single second in the class that we share the time with our students. Now, after you evaluate, you're going to remember the whole process. Is that in conventional education, this stuff never happens. Why? Because let us start from the beginning. What did we say? We started perceiving, we started judging, that went to reasoning, learning, evaluating. Evaluating is my exam. The moment I write my exam paper, moment I give back my answer sheet, I'm least bothered because I know I have done that.
Any problem?
I think the problem is with Dr. Shanti's connection. We'll wait. You can hear me, Shahul sir.
Can you take back the slide? I can tell you.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you enable the screen sharing? Yeah. Is it audible?
Yeah.
Is the screen visible? Till where did you
Yeah.
where?
This is the screen.
Evaluation?
Yeah.
Okay. So the primary idea of evaluation is to perform an analysis of whether the student has understood anything from the content delivery. But what I was trying to tell was, in that process, will a teacher evaluate himself or herself? Evaluation is always one-sided. The only time a teacher gets evaluated is when we collect the feedback forms, correct? But let us think a little bit beyond that. After evaluation, what it is remembering, but what do you remember as a student? The student never remembers anything, or rather for him or her, once he writes the exam and submits the answer paper and he gets his marks, that's the end of it. Are we as teachers able to connect? Because in the first year, that's where I think I dropped off. In the first year, we always have subjects like basic engineering, physics, engineering, chemistry. Now we have environmental sciences. Now we have English, language. But the student is coming and asking, why should I learn this? Is it only for getting my CGPA as a 9 on 10 or a 10 on 10, or is there any purpose? Are we in a position to even answer this question? Can we have any motive, or can we have any logical reasoning to tell him why are we learning English in first year? Or rather, why are we learning physics in first year? Where am I going to apply this? Can we connect the physics that we learn to the quantum physics and to the basics of, device physics, to the basics of processor design, to the basics of theory of computing, to the basics of compiler design, to the basics of strength of materials? Are we able to do that? We all know we are, but whatever we do, it is not reaching the student. The student's question is still not answered, right? Okay, so now let me just finish this loop The forward loop, we saw how an input data gets processed. What is this input data? Input is the knowledge that we give, and the output is going to be the knowledge that the student is going to take forward and deliver back to the environment. So he's going to give it as a feedback to the environment. Over a period of 8 semesters, we are trying to mold a student by thrusting 8 into 5, 40 subjects at least, with 40 into 3, 120 examinations. How does that sound? After all these examinations, he's going to get a grade. That grade is a percentage, which is a cumulative percentage of his marks across 8 semesters. But does that tell him how good an engineer he is? Does that tell him or her, where do I stand given the opportunities that my society is going to give me? Can I face the challenges which are deep-rooted in a society? Am I equipped enough to answer those questions, those fundamental questions of energy, water, or rather the existence itself, potential threat to existence of mankind? Can I answer those basic questions which rule the world? So the marks don't directly translate into the kind of person or the engineer he or she is going to become. So then what is assessment? If my assessment is not going to serve my purpose, then why do we even produce those marks? Creating an assessment takes a lot of effort. So we are going to make a question paper, we are going to make him answer, we are going to invigilate, right? And we are going to see all those funny answers that come out of the student. And maybe we spend at least 10 to 15 minutes over the mentoring session. I don't know what is the ratio of mentoring session across universities, but ideally what they say is in one semester, a student or a mentor is supposed to spend at least 30 to 40 minutes per month at least with the student. Are we spending that kind of a time? Even if we spend, is that productive? Even if it is productive, is it long living? So do we live in the life of the student or the memories of the student even after he passes out? Or are we simply gathering the respect of being a teacher because in the level of hierarchy, in a hierarchical education system, when we walk into a class, the students get up because they get up out of fear. We are getting the respect because we are teachers and they are students. It's a by default activity, right? So as Shahul Amit sir rightly pointed out, assessment seems to be the primordial component of content delivery or education in the current system. Can we just move out of that? Assessments, marks, and evaluations, ranking, everything should just be considered as a byproduct of the whole process. The success of a process does not lie in achieving a bell curve in every assessment. What is a bell curve? The outcome of an examination should always have a bell curve as its output in terms of marks. It's a projection, it's a statistical examination of how effective an assessment is. We always look for a beautiful bell curve. A bell curve states that 10% of the students perform so well, 70% of the students mediocre, another 20% of this, another 20% of the students, okay, they are bound to not perform well. But with an assessment system, if you can convert a practical bell curve to a hypothetical flat curve, which is 100, that's where we want to reach, because that's how an effective a teacher we will be and how effective a student he or she will be. But that is practically impossible. To flatten a curve at its peak point is very impossible, even by mathematics. But to some extent, can we try to flatten it, or rather, can we just come out of the concept of a bell curve and can we look at assessment in a very different way, right? Let's see in the coming slides whether that is even possible. Okay, let's say, okay, we saw what is assessment. What are we assessing? We are assessing a knowledge or content delivery process. Unfortunately, assessment is a single-sided event where a student alone is assessed. But assessment should be a collective event where both the teacher and the student should be assessed. Teachers should be ready to be on the receiving end saying the questions that I put could have been much better. I could have done a better job, or rather, I could have made him or her ask a better question. Not always the teacher is wrong. Teacher has the advantage of having been experienced in that field for some more years, maybe 15 or 16 more years than the student. But still, if there is an opportunity to learn, let us all learn. Let us all get assessed. Let us all improve the system. Now let's see why we need assessments. We can't get rid of assessments. All I said was assessment can be modified, but we can't get rid of the process. Why? We need assessment for administrative purpose. What is an administrative drive for an assessment? Say, in every organization, we want people to progress, right? The growth of an organization is actually monitored by, if it is a financial organization or a profit-making organization, how much profit I made, what is my break-even time, how much revenue did I generate, and how much bonus did I pay my people. So these are the metric. Whereas in an educational institution, the administrative ranking is actually guided by certain rules which are laid down by authorities. Who are these authorities? They are regulatory bodies. What are the known regulatory bodies for us? We have UGC, AICTE, and then we also have accrediting process where NBA and Washington Accord and these kind of people, they try to theorize the process of education. That education, which was once upon a time a happy process of me going into a class and then talking to my students and having some great moments of enlightening moments of knowledge sharing, later became we are all in a rush to say, do we have a COPO, proper COPO mapping? Is my CO properly defined? Do I have a entity in my syllabus which is not mapped to a PO? What is a PSO? What is a PEO? We all started talking terms. Those terms which eventually became the metric for deciding whether an organization is collectively good or not. Whether the system is right or wrong, we don't know. Whether we like it or not, answer for sure is no, because there is a lot of paperwork that happens. But then that has become an accepted metric across the world, where there is some kind of a measure where we try to rank universities, where we try to rank the whole process of education. We can never rank education. But when there is a process, we all try to adhere to that process. Otherwise, we will be lost in the crowd. So assessment is needed for satisfying certain administrative purposes. Second, assessment is needed to satisfy instructional goals. Okay, as a teacher, I teach, or rather I enlighten somebody with some topic. But how will I know that the person has actually understood it? I can ask questions, very mundane questions like define, explain, illustrate, or maybe I will go a little one level above and say, I'll give a problem and I'll ask him to analyze the problem. Or maybe I'll go a little one level above and I say, okay, this is a scenario, you can try designing something. Or maybe I'll go the highest level where I'm going to give him a use case and I'm going to ask him to define the entire problem itself by himself, and then start designing and coming out with the actual outcome where the answers are really convincing. This was again a very, qualitative process once upon a time, but now it is a quantitative process. We have knowledge levels. We have K1, K2, K3, K4, K5, K6 knowledge levels. It didn't end there. We started mapping these knowledge levels to COPO. We started mapping these knowledge levels to some numbers, okay, performance indices. And then we came out with numbers. Okay, I have prepared a question paper which satisfies this criteria with so much percentage, and hence my assessment process is correct. So more than becoming just an instructional outcome where we are trying to evaluate a student for the knowledge he possesses, we started evaluating students for want of satisfying some criteria and some numbers. So that is where we are and where we should not have been. Another process for assessment is research. So research doesn't just mean quote unquote research where we have again papers like research methodologies and things like that. It's not the process that I'm talking about. It's the process of seeking. Can I assess a person to that extent where I am testing myself, where I have instilled that small fire in him or her, saying that, oh, okay, this is a very good concept. Can I go and dwell deep into it? Can I look further into it? Or shall I not look into it because it doesn't matter to me for the kind of knowledge seeking that I am going to perform? Can I make him or her think rationally? That is also a form of assessment, where marks carry secondary priority, and the topmost priority is the measure of knowledge itself. It's not K1, K2, K3 to K6. It is, have I really grown to the level of that kind of a guru or a teacher or a mentor? Okay. As a teacher, you're also a mentor. You cross the line of just being a teacher and a student, and you become somebody in his or her life, where the student is going to come back and be very open with you. You know everything about your student. You know your student much better than, you have to take the pride of knowing your student much better than anybody else. Correct? And there is a sense of pride, right? When some mothers or some parents come and tell, he or she doesn't even open in front of me, but then, with you, he's very comfortable. That is where you win. Can you do a little bit of more effort in gaining the confidence or the trust of your student, and, coexist happily? When a student walks in, don't judge him. Okay, he's a first rank holder. He got so many marks in my subject. He performed very badly in my class. Maybe we all have bad days. We all have very worst days. We would have shouted. We would have thrown dusters. We would have done whatnots. We all have low days also. We all have hyper days also. We are very so happy. My paper got accepted. I'm so happy. I throw a treat. The very next day, I got scolded by somebody. So I will throw it on my student. So all these emotional upheavals, can we all be together? Can we understand each other beyond these emotional, connect and say, okay, I'm there for you. You don't need even a dialogue delivery to let people know, or let your student know that I'm there. He or she knows it, that you are there. Can you go into that level? Can we do a little bit of introspective research where, in this assessment, I know that say you put a test paper, okay? And in that test paper, the best of your students, the best person, he has performed the worst. So, and he has written nothing. And you're going to put a 0. Your conscience says, don't put a 0. He doesn't deserve. But the rule book says, put a 0. What you will do there as a teacher? Okay. So please think in that line and see whether the current assessments that we are doing is correct or wrong, right? So, but you need definitely assessments from the administrative perspective, from the instructional perspective, and from the research perspective, how effective, or rather the first two are quantitative analysis. The last one is a qualitative way of looking at assessments. We all need assessments. It is justified, but the way we do assessments, is that justified or not? Answer definitely is no, but then let's see how we can make it a bit more effective. Okay. So now that we all confirm that assessment is needed, let's look at what are the kinds of assessments that we can have. And we all know that there are summative and formative assessments, but can we look a little beyond? Can we peep a little bit deep into it? So there are 3 types of assessments broadly. Starting from that date when education became a formal system, even from the Gurukula days, there are 3 types of assessments. This is not defined in textbook. Okay, this is more of a conceptual thing. So the first type of assessment is non-referenced. A non-reference assessment is, I as a student is evaluated by my teacher without referring any other standard. I am evaluated for what I am. I don't have a frame of reference. I'm not given a grade. I'm not given a percentage mark. I'm not given a percentile mark. I'm just told what I am, where I have to improve, where I am good, and where I am excellent. There is nobody else there for a comparison. This is non-referenced. Second one, criterion referenced. That is where we say, I have certain criteria. The criteria can be a threshold in the mark, or maybe, I keep my examination in such a way that you answer 2 out of 3 questions, A or B, right? Or we say you have 2 internals and 1 external examination. Your internal examinations carry 20% weightage, external carries 80% weightage. You have a lab carries 40% weightage. So these are criterion and referenced assessments. When such assessments come, it's not an individual you are assessing, it's a collective assessment. Among 100 people, how you have performed. Okay, it can be either a percentage-based assessment or a percentile-based assessment or a grade-based assessment. The last one is ipsative, is a new term. It might sound Greek and Latin, but let me just explain it to you. Ipsative is where, I'm not just going to evaluate a student based on certain criteria and based on certain reference. I'm going to evaluate a student based on the previous history. That's when you say, he's the only person who has scored 100 on 100 in structural engineering in Kerala University. So there I make a statement. I make a statement which is so strong enough that elevates the student from a normal student to somebody who is a celebrity. There are positives and negatives. Positives, the student stays in the limelight forever. And every time the student performs in some activity, he or she is judged against his own experience in his past, right? So if he has scored 100 on 100 in structures, why he didn't score 80% in the cumulative assessment? What happened to him? Oh, something has happened because maybe he's not that effective. So we start doing this relative assessment of the student with himself or herself. It's based on the past. The downside of it is what I'm talking now. That person who did very good in one subject, who could not do well in the rest of the subjects, got a cumulative of 70% in spite of scoring 100 on 100 on one subject. What did we just do? We just biased the student to look through a kaleidoscope, through a prism, which we created for him. He was best in something, but cumulatively, he is not the best. So can we just can we just avoid, or rather redefine these kind of assessments? The current form of assessments really does ipsative treatment to the student. Okay, so now if you now this is a broader classification, and if you see stage wise how the progressive value of an assessment grows, let's see that chart. Stage 1, you perform a diagnostic assessment. So okay, stage 1 is where you walk into the class. In the first few weeks of the subject, we start a small diagnosis. We say who is good, let's say we are taking a Python class. So who is good in Python, who all has a previous, that's the first question we ask, right? Do you know Python? You know the basics? Have you gone to some, have you got previous training? So you as a teacher, we form a kind of a rough idea of how my class is going to look like. That is a diagnostic. So I'm getting a hindsight. I'm without any prior knowledge of each and every student, I'm able to predict an overall progression for the course as well as the outcomes. So stage 2 is formative, right? So formative assessment is where you have reached a certain stage of content delivery and you say, okay, now this much is sufficient for me to assess the student regarding how much he has gained in this particular subject. So this will be your internal assessments, or maybe the assignments you're giving, or maybe those surprise tests you just walk in and give, right? And stage 3 is summative. So after you have a couple of formatives, you're going to give him a finale, grand finale. There should be a university examination, which is summative examination. So summation is a foresight. So summation is actually confirmation, or rather what you say. Oh, okay. In the diagnostic stage, as a teacher, I predicted that this person is going to score 100 on 100. He has scored. Or rather 30% of the people will pass with the first class. Okay, that has happened. So it's just not the student. We also feel so happy. Okay, what I predicted became true. So that is stage 3. Do we have stages beyond this? Is it possible to have stages beyond this? Probably no. Okay, but still there is a small probability. Yes, we can have a confirmative assessment. That is when we track the student beyond his performance in a university exam and say, how effective has been my teaching? Is he placed well? Is he doing good in his placement? Is he placed in an industry where he really wanted to be? Or did I really make him an engineer where he wanted to become a painter? Can I measure the effectiveness of my my role as a teacher or a mentor? There is no system that allows you to literally measure this. You can't measure confirmativeness, correct? So the last one is stage 5 application. This pakka we are not doing because we are not there with the student when he actually is doing a problem solving. Are we invited in the industry and told that, see, look, your student who passed out 10 years back is doing like this because you didn't teach him well in computer organization? No, probably he would be, sitting in some bank and crunching some Excel sheets. So we don't know. We don't know practically, are we in the right track? We really don't know. So there is no stage 4 or stage 5 in the current assessment process. If some good brain, if some good organization can think about that, then that is true assessment. Stage 1 to stage 5 is the complete process. Stage 3, where we consider that to be the finale, is never the finale. We are just leaving the child blindsided in the midst of a chaos. What we give him or her, we give a lot of marks, a lot of grades, and make the student feel either superior or inferior. And we leave it there. And we start off the whole saga in the next semester. And by the time the person leaves, we brand him as an alumni and we try seeing, okay, if what percentage of my alumni are in which industry. So we always have a metric everywhere. So which is becoming a quantitative analysis. There is no qualitative analytics anywhere. Okay. So the value add is when you move on the vertical, and the difficulty is higher when you move on the horizontal. So it's very difficult as you move towards stage 4 and stage 5, and hence such an assessment never happens unless there are 1 or 2 cases. Definitely it will happen. We have those students who come back to us, right? We have the students who come back to us saying, okay, I want to give back to my alma mater. I want to be there with you. I want to contribute more to my alma mater. This is something that I miss here. I want to gain that back. Or rather, there'll be a Thanksgiving once in a while when the teacher remembers you, when the student remembers you, or you remember your student. So that connect happens, no? That maintaining that connect is very difficult. If we teach 500 students, maybe 1 student we will connect with. The more that number grows, do we have a metric there? How many students we are connecting with? We don't have, because we are not judged post as a teacher or a student. We are judged only at that moment of 4 years when we are student and teachers. So let us think beyond those 4 years and make the things more effective. Okay, now let's see who are all the stakeholders in assessment. The first stakeholder is the person who actually creates the test. Who is the person who creates the test? The default answer is teacher. Have we ever tried making the student create a test paper for himself? Maybe we may tell that assignments are those. No, assignments are not those. A student should not be tested for his capacity to by heart the things. That is rote learning. I know industry wants a student to remember the definition of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. No industry wants the student to remember the syntax of a programming language. If I write something in a programming language, if that doesn't compiler is there to tell me, see, you have a syntax error. But what the industry expects is, as a smart engineer, is he able to find a solution for his process, for the problem in hand? Is he able to put a process in place? Is he able to maintain a process in place? Is he able to become a leader? Right? Then why are we testing him with questions like define, explain, illustrate? I don't want to know that. But I want to know whether he is able to apply the definition of that to a problem. Correct? So the thing is, the questions have to be in such a way that I test the student for the proper response, or rather the student tests himself for a proper response. From the current format of teacher putting a question and the student answering, it's very difficult to go to a space where the test creator is the student himself. Okay. Next, the stakeholder is institution itself. This we already spoke about. Institution has to keep assessments in place for validating certain criteria, for keeping the credentials alive, for maintaining the analytics, maintaining my ranking, and attract the next batch of students. This is where, as an institution, the assessments are made use for. But TKM is a proud, is a very proud institution which takes pride in having alumni like, the ISRO chairman. There are so many people who have come out of TKM. So when we produce one ISRO chairman, can we produce many great ISRO scientists? Can we produce many great entrepreneurs? No, we cannot. No institution can, even IITs cannot. Dropping from IIT is a cult now. There are thousands of people who have dropped out from IIT and become nothing. Very few have become, and their stars are well aligned when they dropped out, and hence they have become something. They're extremely lucky. Situations favored their existence, right? So the whole process of redefining the assessment takes a lot of risk, but there is that sweet spot where the risk is going to become a reward. Okay, so it has to be a very calculated move when we start redefining assessments. It should be one step at a time, not affecting any of these stakeholders. Now, once we start redefining assessment, there will be some kind of open issues. What these open issues can be, right? Say I keep an assessment which is open book. There is no standard which tells how to properly set an open book exam. It is left to the jurisdiction of the teacher and the student. Always assessment has to be written. Why can't assessment be oral? I'm not talking about Viva. Viva, lab exams. Lab Viva is the most threatening of all. It goes in such a way that the aim of the teacher is to make the student fail or make the student know that he knows nothing. Right? No, lab assessments can be, a very interactive dialogue between the student and the teacher, and they are collectively trying to solve a problem. That is sufficient for a teacher to judge whether the student is capable of even, going to the next step. So, but these kind of reformed forms of assessments, people are afraid to go there for the only reason that there are no guidelines. We are all used to guidelines. We are all used to numbers or documents that tell us what to do. Why can't we be the people who tell others what to do? Why can't we prove a point? Why can't we do something different? People who have walked away from the crowd have always been noted for good reasons. Let's walk away from the crowd and give a shout out. Hey, look, this is how we can survive, even if we are not part of you. Okay. So that needs a lot of confidence, a lot of support, and a lot of change in the mindset, along with some kind of a framework. Okay, we are moving from a completely regulated framework to a completely non-regulated framework. So we can't just leave anything non-regulated. There should be, the one end of the rope should always be with the regulatory bodies, but the regulation should not be stringent enough in the way the current regulations are, but it should be more progressive, right? And the regulation should be such that it should be evaluating both the student as well as the teacher. Let the teacher be part of it. Let the teacher also get ranked. Let the teacher also get motivated to do better. Okay, that's where this engagement and then inter-community dialogue comes, because that's inter-community dialogue is a very important thing, because we always perform assessments among ourselves. For me, an external examiner is somebody whom I know, because he or she would have invited me for his student as an external examiner. And that's how we try to build a community of known people. A community of known people is a community of known behavior. There is a pattern, and there is a lot of give and take. And in that process, we tend to forget something. Can we just blindly seek, are Are we courageous enough to go out in the middle of the crowd and say, come, judge me. I will never fail. Right? So are we opening ourselves to a larger community? Are we going to make that network? Our network, so how it goes is my network includes the network of my professor. My students' network includes my network. So there is always a safe zone that we don't want to come out of it. Okay. The moment we don't come out, we shrink. So let's open up. Let's go beyond what we know and let's take the risk. And once you do that, then the person who actually gets benefited out of all this is the student. And remember, when I say student, we are also students as teachers. We are students to our own teachers, right? So we learn as a teacher, the student learns as a student. So it's a collective system that benefits. The institution also learns. Current people will retire maybe after in a span of say 15 to 20 years. Then there are new people who are part of the institution to carry forward the legacy. So are we building something that is progressive enough for the institution as well? So if all these stakeholders benefit, then we are in a position to reform the whole assessment process. Now, we have seen so many things. Probably this is the last slide. We have seen what is an assessment. We saw why assessment. We saw what are the different forms of assessment and who are the stakeholders of assessment. But then the whole process of assessment, the underlying feature is faith. When I walk into a class, my students trust me. And as a student, when I sit in a class, I abundantly trust my teacher. So there is a faith that we are not going to let down each other, come what may. And once somebody is my student, he or she is always my student till the time he chooses to not keep me as his teacher, right? So are we building a faith equation there? So let's quickly see how this faith equation looks like. The faith equation is just not between the student and the teacher. The faith equation starts from the entire governance process. Okay, when there is somebody to govern you, he or she will govern you with some set of regulations. Regulations will put forward the proper process. A process is established with the help of technology. And these are the means and methods with which you can establish something that is strong enough. So you have something that is strong enough, and the respective stakeholders are going to abundantly trust these means and methods. So now let's see who are the people who are involved. So I talk about the institutional thing in the means and methods, but the people involved, you have people, that means the student and the teachers community. Then the alliance, how do you connect beyond your internal community? And then the partnerships, can we grow collectively? Can we be the helping hand for each other in the form of institutions or alliances or larger community, right? It's just not a university in Kerala, it's just not a university in India. Can you think beyond? Because a person in first year of engineering who is 18 years old is just not competing with the rest of the 59 students in his class. He has almost 3 to 4 million youngsters who are in that age group of 18 to 25. So there is a bigger attention to this problem. Problem space is huge. Stakeholders are much huge. So these are the people who should be accountable for setting up the whole process, setting up and establishing a faith equation, and then giving a sustenance attribute to it. By all means of fairness, can we make the process as fair as possible? The best of the person gets the best, and that person who is a very slow learner also get the best what he deserves. Can we be fair to everybody? Is the process reliable? Can we reproduce my results? If I do it for one subject, can I reproduce it the same kind of or the effect? Subject to subject things will differ, but then there is something that is common, which is the process. So can I have that reliability aspect on the process, which will help me reproduce the results and grow forward? Next, can I ensure as a mentor that whatever my mentee comes and tells me, and the mark, so we all have this process of publishing the mark in the notice board. I also have been part of that. My marks have been published alongside other students' marks. Why is this happening? Why will I even publish my marks? Just to show that so many students have gained 100 out of 100 in my subject? I don't want that. I'll be more bothered about those students who failed in the subject. And the question to that answer would be, maybe I'm not effective in going to the the slowest learner in the class. Can I ensure at every point in time the faith that my student has in me will be established by guaranteeing privacy? And what is more important is inclusiveness. Can we have the assessment? Can we allow the student to come and negotiate? Why am I graded like this? Where did I falter? Is there a place? Didn't I perform there well? Don't I deserve a much better treatment? Can we entertain such questions, interrogative questions from the student with all respects? Let us have a very inclusive process. And at the end, let's be transparent. The student who approaches me with some trust in the beginning, the trust should have only grown further. The faith should have only built up. There should not be deterioration in the faith system. Correct? So these will be the possible outcomes of an effective assessment system. So now, can we make assessments enjoyable? The answer is not an immediate yes, but then if the process, if the governance, if the regulatory bodies all try, definitely it will be. So I'm just going to give you, this is the last aspect. So Imtiaz sir had asked me to share a couple of experiences of mine. So with your permission, I'm going to share the one of the assessments that I had given to my students. So probably it's just one question, okay? And I have made it a practice in my subject everywhere that it will be an open book exam. All the subjects, all the assessments, we have 4 exams in one semester. All 4 exams are open book. The student is allowed to discuss. The student is allowed to open the book, Google, go to refer papers. He can do everything. The only restriction the student has is time. And hello. Yeah, so the only restriction my student will be having is just the time. And is open book effective? Definitely open book is effective, because the first subject that I taught in the first semester was microprocessors. And from there, the second semester, I'm going to teach him computer organization with mathematical modeling. So he doesn't remember the definitions, but he remembers the means and the methods. So that was a success model. So I'll just share a few examples, couple of examples, not much. So to start with, is my screen visible?
Yes. Can you zoom it? Zoom.
You want me to zoom it? Yeah,
Yes, yes. Maybe you can show one question at a time.
Yeah.
You're showing question number 1 or 2 first? Question number 1.
I'm showing question number 1.
Yes, it can be seen. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a question paper that I prepared for the reinforcement learning elective for the MTech in AI at TKM. So if you see the first question, the idea of the first question is to understand whether the student knows the basics of reinforcement learning. I could have easily asked a question where I'm going to ask, like you say, define the basic elements of reinforcement learning. If I ask such a question, I'm just trying to see whether the person remembers basic elements of reinforcement learning. And I don't want definitions of reinforcement learning basics. What I instead wanted was, I gave a scenario. Basically, it's a tic-tac-toe game. So if the person does not know what a tic-tac-toe game is, he or she is free to refer to what the game looks like. Okay. And then with reference to that game, the first question says, can you formulate the basic elements of reinforcement learning for tic-tac-toe game? So the idea is, unless he knows what are the basic elements, he cannot formulate it for this game. So first, he should have an understanding of what the game is. He should have an understanding of these basic elements. And then he is trying to map those elements to the game. So this is kind of, a smart replacement of a define or an illustrate or an explain question. Okay. Now, a game is normally played by two people, correct? And hence a slight modification. If a single player is going to play both the sides, that means I know what I'm going to play next. I'm going to play against myself. So can a student put himself in that perspective and start thinking about how will we revise the definitions of the basic elements of RL for this particular scenario? Again, it is based on how much he understands what these basic elements are. And it is just that he has to give that little bit tweak when he has to consider that he is going to play against himself. Right? Now, the third question is being a game of symmetry. So tic-tac-toe is basically a 3x3. It's kind of a refined form of Sudoku. So it's a game of symmetry where you have a perfect 3x3 square. So every time you try to represent a square, you will have a diagonal symmetry and axial symmetry. So the moment you think of symmetry, you will try to draw that middle line or the diagonal line and start assigning values. If the something above the diagonal will have positive value, below the diagonal will have a negative value, right? So the third question says, if it is a game of symmetry, would you assign same value to symmetrically equivalent positions with a positive or negative? So you can justify your answer. In tic-tac-toe, you cannot. So the reason why you cannot is because of the nature of the game itself. So if this knowledge is there, then he'll be able to answer the question. So this question, ideally, if it is asked in the normal K1 standard question, we will say, define the basic elements of reinforcement learning with an example. It's the same question which is being asked in a very different way. Okay, so this is just an attempt. Okay, now the second question, if you see, is a pretty straightforward question. We have given a graph model here, and in that graph model, we are trying to evaluate something. So this is, please let us not get into the technicalities of the question. So the idea is, there is a graph. The graph, the edges have some weight, and there is a directionality for these edges. So if such a graph exists, calculate some values. So this is an easy scoring exam. So here again, normal question asked would be, such a graph will not be given. Instead, what we give is the textbook definition of a graph, textbook definition of an edge, and textbook definition of this weight. Instead of that, this is a graph which is cyclic. It's a perfect example of a cyclic graph. We normally give it for a non-cyclic graph. The question has a cyclic graph. So is he able to crack the problem for a cyclic graph? So first of all, the person has to understand that it is a cyclic graph. So is that understanding there? Question wise, it's a very straightforward question, but the tweak is in the graph itself. We teach them with non-cyclic graphs, but the question is asked for a cyclic graph. Okay. Now, the third question. Usually, questions are asked in such a way that you are given what is your grid size, or rather the problem size, and the parameters for the problem will be defined in the problem statement itself, so that a question can have only one answer. Whereas if you can allow that degree of freedom for the student, where we are saying, I'm just telling you that it is a 4x4 grid. You make all your assumptions. You formulate the actions, you formulate the task, you formulate basic assumptions. What is the starting state? What is the terminal? Everything you formulate. So the student gets a freedom to create the question for himself. If he is a very intuitive student, he will create the toughest example. And if he is a student who has understood it from the periphery, he will make for himself a simple example. But both are right. Both are trying to prove a point that I know this problem to this extent. Right. So this actually elicits the fact that the student has understood what we are asking. He's able to formulate a problem. Okay. And so for this problem, for this 4x4 grid, for the kind of values that you have taken as a student, can you define the prediction problem? So this is not a generic definition of a prediction problem. This might look like a definition question, but it is not. I'm asking him to define prediction problem based on this formulation. It definitely varies from question to question. And then if at all he has formulated this right, then write a pseudocode. The direct question of this would be, write the pseudocode for iterative policy evaluation. It's an algorithm. But here he has to write this algorithm with respect to this particular problem and this particular assumptions. So in this way, you are able to actually completely assess how much, to what depth the student knows the question, knows the answer. Okay. Now, of all the questions, this one is my favorite, because if the student is going to answer this question, he probably knows everything in this subject. The reason is, how do we teach algorithms? We teach algorithms by explaining the pseudocode, solving a problem, and keep reiterating the fact with every problem that we solve. But here, an algorithm is given in a situational way. There is a situation where I want to move from one state to another, and the result of this may be with the help of a set of actions. These are the possible actions I can take. If such a situation exists, then can you identify the algorithm that will apply to the situation? And if you apply the algorithm, can you write the pseudocode for the algorithm? So this is a perfect design problem, right? And then part B is like, if at all he has identified what algorithm I'm asking here, then there is a problem statement. Nothing. This is like how you starting point, end point, can you join the dots and get to the destination? That's the question. So I have a grid where I have many starting points and many end points. The student is free to start or fix his starting point, but his destination has to be here. So in this premise, if this is your game, can you formulate or can you solve the problem applying the algorithm above? So this is more application centric, where you can, at the very outset, this question paper might appear very difficult. But if you read through it, this question paper is the simplest, because it's appearing difficult because the questions are asked in a very, very different way. But ultimately, the answer is very simple. So can we train our students to think like this? Give them the freedom. Make the question paper, this question paper, whether it was enjoyable to my students, I really don't know. Because probably this is the first time they're writing this kind of an exam. Initially, there'll be a lot of hiccups. They may be very unhappy. They might not want to do anything at all. They might even say, okay, open book exams is a failure. But the larger impact of these kind of questions will actually make the student look beyond textbooks. To teach what is there in a textbook, you need a teacher. But to teach what is intuitive enough, what is beyond the textbook, and what are the premises based on which such ideas were written in the textbook, you need a person or a mentor or a teacher who goes beyond the role of teaching and is ready to learn along with the student and refine his or her knowledge base. Every time I teach the same subject, I want to teach it differently. I want to teach something very different. So if we grow along with our student, our assessment methods will also be definitely different. So I think I have shared enough. I have spoken enough. I would love to conclude this presentation by saying that the motive is not to tell that teachers are wrong, students are wrong, assessment methods are wrong. That would be like nullifying all the efforts that we have put so far. But it's the expectation. The whole process of content delivery, the whole process of knowledge seeking has changed globally. Now we are in a digital era where we are having Zoom sessions. We don't even see the student. We don't have a connect with the student. Thankfully, the students are coming back, but then there is a fear. The students are not the students they were once upon a time when they joined, right? They have gone through many things in the last 2 years and then they're coming. They have a fear of being judged, being evaluated. The teachers, those who were not tech savvy, those who were not digitally friendly enough, they learned a lot of things under pressure. We were pushed to Zoom, we were pushed to Google Meet, we were pushed to Microsoft Teams. There were a lot of digital platforms that were coming up. Each one needed a different form of questionnaire. And much of our effort went in just adjusting ourselves to the new demanding situation, where in that process, somewhere we kept ourselves to our comfort zones. So let us try to come out. Let's try to look at things beyond what we have looked at it so far. And with all due respects to all my teachers who have assessed me the conventional way, I'm not saying that they are wrong. They are proven methods. It is a textbook finish success. It is something that has produced stalwarts. It has produced great alumni for TKM, no doubt. But when somebody has written a success story that tells that we can write better stories. When we write better stories is when our teachers will be proud of us. Let's start writing the better stories. Thank you.
Dr. Shanti, it was a very fantastic session which made us all think of alternatives so I'm sure that many faculty would want to comment and would want to give feedback, but we are late in the night. So I just, as a representative from all our side, let me request Dr. Bijna to have a concluding remarks and wind up the session. Dr. Bijna.
Hello. Thank you very much for such a fantastic session. I don't know whether I'll be. Yeah, I was traveling, so I missed out a very important portion of what you were taking. I just want to say that this is the need of the hour when we wanted to look at how we should change our viewpoint and how we should change the whole orientation of evaluations. So this is the right time when MTS sir came up with this suggestion of having such a session by a very, apt person like you. So I'll take this turn to thank Shanti for all this time that you have spent and the expertise that you have shared with us. We are very much indebted to you, and I hope all the faculty who were listening would have got at least a few points to start with, actually implementing the new method of evaluations, and even how we should actually look at doing things, especially in dealing with our students. I hope Shanti will be there to help us out and to give suggestions also. And as a person whom we treat as our own family, it will be able for all of us to interact with Shanti also. So hope you would not mind that also. And looking for such interactions in the future too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Doctor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr.
Thank you. Yeah.
For such a wonderful session, we would like to continue this maybe another day, maybe offline, because having programs in the evening is difficult for many of us. So we'll have a kind of, depending upon your convenience, we'll have a follow-up sessions. We'll plan it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who has joined the session. Thank you, and so that's all from our side. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Bijna ma'am, for those nice words. You're my teacher, and thanks a lot. Thank you, Imtiaz sir. Thank you, Shalomit sir. Thanks a lot.